So I took a super long break. Anyways, let's get back to reading. So I remember around the area we left off. So I'm just gonna do the sentence right after that. Now, I can't tell you what the messages are that the study of mythology is bringing to young people today. I know what it did for me, but it is doing something for them. When I go to lecture at any college, the faculty very often assigns me to a room that's a little small, smaller than it should have been, because they don't know how much excitement there was going to be in the student body. Take a guess. What do you think the mythology, the stories they're going to hear from you, do for them? They're stories about the wisdom of life. They really are. What we're learning in our schools is not the wisdom of life. We're learning technologies. We're getting information. There's a curious reluctance on the part of faculties to indicate the life values of their subjects in our sciences today, and this includes anthropology, linguistics, the study of religion, and so forth. There is a tendency to specialization, and when you know how much a specialist scholar has to know in order to be a competent specialist, you understand this tendency. To study Buddhism, for instance, you have to be able to handle not only all the European languages in which the discussions of the Oriental came from. Came, cup. Discussions of the Oriental come, particularly French, German, English, and Italian. Also, Sanskrit, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, and several other languages. Now, this is a tremendous task. Such a specialist can't also be wondering about the differences between the Iroquois and la 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 la. Specialization tends to limit the field of problems that the specialist is concerned with. Now, the people who isn't a specialist but a generalist like myself see something over here and that he has learned from one specialist, something over there that he has learned from another specialist, and neither of them has considered the problem of why this occurs here and also there. So the generalist, and that's a derogatory term, by the way, for academics gets into a range of other problems that are more genuinely human, you might say, than specifically cultural. Moyers. Then along comes the journalist who has a license to explain things he doesn't understand. That is not only a license, but something that is put upon him. He has an obligation to educate himself in public. Now, I remember when I was a young man going to hear Heinrich Zimmer lecture. He was the first man I know of to speak about myths as though they had messages that were valid for life, not just interesting things for scholars to fool around with, and that confirmed me in a feeling I had ever since boyhood. Do you remember the first time you discovered myth? The first time the story came alive in you? I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. Now, one of the great advantages of being as a Roman Catholic is that you're taught to take myths seriously and let it operate on your life and to live in terms of these mythic motifs. I was brought up in terms of seasonal relationships to the cycle of Christ coming into the world, teaching in the world, dying, resurrecting, and returning to heaven. The ceremonies all through the year kept you in mind of the eternal core of all that changes in time. Sin is simply getting out of touch with that harmony. And then I fell in love with American Indians because Buffalo Bill used to come to Madison Square Garden every year with his marvelous Wild West show. And I wanted to know more about Indians. My mother and father were very generous parents and found what books were being written for boys about Indians at that time, so I began to read American Indian myths. And it wasn't long before I found the same motifs in the American Indian stories that I was being taught by the nuns at school. Creation, 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 death, and resurrection, ascension to heaven, virgin births. I didn't know what it was, but I recognized the vocabulary, one after another. And what happened? I was excited. That was the beginning of my interest in comparative mythology. Did you begin by asking why does it say it this way while the Bible says it that way? No, I didn't start the comparative analysis until many years later. What appealed to you about the Indian stories? In those days, there was still American Indian lore in the air. Indians were still around. Even now, when I deal with myths from parts of the world, I find the American Indian tales and narratives to be very rich, very well developed. And then my parents had a place out in the woods where the Delaware Indians had lived, and the Iroquois had come down and fought them. There was a big ledge where we could dig for Indian arrowheads and things like that. And the very animals that play the role in Indian stories were there in the woods around me. It was a grand introduction to this material. Did those stories begin to collide with your Catholic faith? No, there was no collision. The collision with my religion came much later in relation to scientific studies and things of that kind. Later, I became interested in Hinduism, and there were the same stories again. And in my graduate work, I was dealing with the Arthurian medieval material, and there were the same stories again. So you can't tell me they're not the same stories. I've been with them all my life. They come from every culture, but with timeless themes. The themes are limitless, and the inflection is to the culture. So the stories may take the same universal theme but apply it slightly differently, depending upon the accent of the people who are speaking. Oh, yes, if you were not alert to the parallel themes, you perhaps would think they were quite different stories, but they're not. You taught mythology for 38 years at Sarah Lawrence. How did you get these young women coming to college from their middle class backgrounds, from their orthodox religions? How did you get them interested in myths? Young people just grab this stuff. Mythology teaches you what's behind literature and the arts. It teaches you about your own life. It's a great, exciting life, nourishing subject. Mythology has a great deal to do with the stages of life, the initiation ceremonies, as you move from childhood to adult responsibilities, from the unamar st- unmarried state into the married state. All these rituals are mythological rites. They have with your recognition of the new role that you're in, the process of throwing off the the old one and coming out in the new and entering into a responsible profession. When a judge walks into a room and everybody stands up, you're not standing up to that guy, you're standing up to the role that he's wearing and the role that he's going to play. What makes him worthy of that role is his integrity as a representative of the principles of that role and not some group of prejudices of his own. So what you're standing up to is a mythological character. I imagine some kings and queens are the most stupid, absurd, banal people you could run into. Probably interested only in horses and women, But you're not responding to them as personalities. You're responding to them in their mythological roles. When someone becomes a judge or president of the United States, the man is no longer that man. He's the representative of an eternal office. He has to sacrifice his personal desires and even life possibilities to the role that he now signifies. So, there are mythological rituals that work in our society. The ceremony of marriage is one. The ceremony of inauguration of a president or judge is another. What are some of the other rituals that are important to society today? Joining the army, putting on a uniform is another. You're giving up your personal life and accepting a socially determined manner of life in the service of the society of which you are a member. This is why I think it is obscene to judge people in terms of civil law for performances that are rendered in time of war. They were acting not as individuals, they were acting as agents of something above them, and to which they had, by dedication, given themselves to them as though they were individual human beings is totally improper. You've seen what happens when primitive societies are unsettled by white man civilization. They go to pieces, they disintegrate, they become dispersed. Hasn't the same thing been happening to us since our myths began to disappear? Absolutely, it has. Isn't that why conservative religions today are calling for the old time religion? Yes, and they're making a terrible mistake. They are going back to something that is vegetal, that doesn't serve life. But didn't it serve us? Sure, it did. I understand the yearning in my youth. I had fixed stars. They comforted me with their premise. They gave me a known horizon, and they told me there was a loving, kind, and just Father out there looking down on me, ready to receive me, thinking of my concerns all the time. Now, Saul Bellow says that science has made a cleaning. House cleaning of beliefs, but there was value in these things for me. I am today what I am because of those beliefs. I wonder what happens to children who don't have those fixed stars, that known horizon, those myths. All right, I'm gonna go get some water. I got super distracted. So I'm pretty sure I just got to this page. Um, well, as I said, all you have to do is read the newspaper. It's a mess. On this immediate level of life and structure, myths offer life models, but the models have to be appropriate to the time in which you are living. And our time has changed so fast that what was once proper 50 years ago is not proper today. The virtues of the past are the vices of today, and many of what were thought to be the vices of the past are the necessities of today. The moral order has to catch up with the moral necessities of the actual life and time, here and now. And that is what we are not doing. The old time religion belongs to another age, another people, another set of human values, another universe. By going back, you throw yourself out of sync with history. Our kids lose their faith in the religions that were taught to them, and they go inside, often with the help of a drug. Yes, the mechanically induced mystical experience is what you have there. I have attended a number of psychological all right, sorry, I was just having a conversation with my mother. um, yes, the mechanically induced mystical experience is what you have there. I have attended a number of psychological conferences dealing with this whole problem of the difference between mystical experience and the psychological crack up. The difference is that the one who cracks up is drowning in water, which the mystic swims. You have to be prepared for this experience. You talk about this peyote culture emerging and becoming dominant among Indians as a consequence of the loss of the buffalo in their earlier way of life. Yes, ours is one of the worst histories in relation to the native peoples of any civilized nation. They are non persons, they are not even reckoned in the statistics of the voting population of the United States. There was a moment shortly after the American Revolution when there were a number of distinguished Indians who actually participated in American government and life. George Washington said that Indians should be incorporated as members of our culture, but instead they are turned into vestiges of the past. In the 19th century, all the Indians of the Southeast were put into wagons and shipped under military guard out to what was then called Indian Territory, which was given to the Indians in perpetuity as their own world, then a couple years later was taken away from them. Recently, anthropologists studied a group of Indians in northwestern Mexico who live within a few miles of a major area for the national growth of peyote. Peyote is their animal, that is to say. They associate it with the deer, and they have very special missions to go collect peyote and bring it back. These missions are mystical journeys with all of the details of the typical mystical journey. First, there is a disengagement from secular life. Everybody who is going to go on this expedition has to make a complete confession of all of his faults or her. And if they don't, the magic is not going to work. Then they start on the journey. They even speak a special language, a negative language. Instead of saying yes, for example, they say no. Or instead of saying we are going, they say we are coming. They are in another world. They then come to the threshold of the adventure. There are special shrines that represent stages of mental transformation on the way. And then comes the great business of collecting peyote. The peyote is killed as though it were a deer. They sneak up on it, shoot a little arrow at it, then perform the ritual of collecting the peyote. The whole thing is a complete duplication of the kind of experience that is associated with the inward journey. When you leave the outer world and come into the realm of spiritual beings, they identify each little stage as spiritual transformation. They're in a sacred place all the way. Why do they make such an intricate process out of it? Well, it has to do with the peyote being not simply a biological, mechanical, chemical effect, but one of spiritual transformation. If you undergo a spiritual transformation, you and have not had preparation for it, you do not know how to evaluate what has happened to you. And you get the terrible experiences of a bad trip, as they used to call it with LSD. If you know where you are going, you won't have a bad trip. So this is why psychological crisis, if you are drowning in the water where you ought to be able to swim, but you aren't prepared, that is true of the spiritual life anyhow. It is a terrifying experience to have your consciousness transform. You talk a lot about consciousness. Yes. What do you mean by it? It is part of the Cartesian mode to think of consciousness as being something peculiar to the head, that the head is the organ originating consciousness. It isn't the head. The head is an organ that inflicts consciousness in a certain direction or to a certain set of purposes, but there's a conscious here in the body. The whole living world is informed by consciousness. I have a feeling that consciousness and energy are the same thing somehow. Where you really see life, there's consciousness. Certainly, the vegetable world is conscious, and when you live in the woods, as I did as a kid, you can see all these different consciousnesses relating to themselves. There's a plant conscious, and there's an animal conscious, and we share both these things. You eat certain foods, and the bike knows where there's something there for it to go to work on. The whole process is consciousness. Trying to interpret it in simple mechanistic terms won't work. How do we transform our consciousness? That's a matter of what you were disposed to think about. And that's what meditation is for. All of life is a meditation. Most of the unintentional. A lot of people spend most of life in meditating on where their money is coming from and where it's going to go. If you have a family to bring up, if you're concerned for the family, these are all very important concerns, but they have to do with physical conditions mostly. But how are you going to communicate spiritual consciousness to the children if you don't have it yourself? How do you get that? What the myths are for is to bring us into a level of consciousness that is spiritual. Just for example, I walk off 51st Street and 5th Avenue into St. Patrick's Cathedral. I left a very busy city in one of the most economically inspired cities on the planet. I walk into that cathedral and everything around me speaks of spiritual mysteries. The mystery of the cross. What's that all about there? The stained glass windows, which bring another atmosphere in. My consciousness has been brought up onto another level altogether, and I'm on a different platform. And then I walk out, and I'm back on the level of the street again. Now, can I hold something from the cathedral consciousness? Certain prayers or meditations are designed to hold your consciousness on that level instead of letting it drop down all down here all the way. And then what you finally do is to recognize that this is simply a lower level of that higher consciousness, the mystery that is expressed there is operating in that field of your money. For example, all money is congealed energy. I think that's the clue to how to transform your consciousness. Don't you sometimes think, as you consider these stories, that you are drowning in other people's dreams? I don't listen to other people's dreams, but all of these myths are other people's dreams. Oh no, they're not. They are the world's dreams. They are our typical, our archetypal dreams and deal with the great human problems. I know when I came to one of these thresholds now, the myth tells me about it, how to respond to the certain crises of disappointment or delay or failure or success. The myth tell me where I am. What happens when people become legends? Can you say, for example, that John Wayne has become a myth? When a person becomes a model for other people's lives, he has moved into the sphere of being mythologized. This happens so often to actors in films where we get so many of our models. I have 5 more minutes for this session. I remember when I was a boy, Douglas Fairbanks was the model for me. Adolf Menja was the model for my brother. Of course, these men were playing the roles of mythic figures. They were educators toward life. No figure in movie history is more engaging to me than Shane. Did you see the movie Shane? No, I didn't. It is the classic story of the stranger who rides in from outside and does good for others and rides away, not waiting for his reward. Why is it that films affect us this way? There's something magical about films. The person you are looking at is also somewhere else at the same time. That is a condition of the god. If a movie actor comes into the theater, everybody turns and looks at the movie actor. He is the real hero of the occasion. He is on another plane. He is a multiple presence. What are you seeing on the screen really isn't he, and yet the he comes, though through the multiple forms, the form of forms, out of which all this comes is right here. Movies seem to create these large figures, while television merely creates celebrities. They don't become models as much as they do objects of gossip. Perhaps that's because we see TV personalities in home instead of in a special temple like the movie theater. I saw a photograph yesterday of this latest cult figure from Hollywood, Rambo, the Vietnam veteran who returned to rescue prisoners of war. And though violent swaths of death and destruction, he brings them back. I understand. It is the most popular movie in Biarritz. The photograph showed the new rainbow doll that has been created and is being sold by the same company that produces the Cabbage Patch dolls. It is foreground is the image of a sweet, lovable Cabbage Patch doll, and behind it, the brute force Rainbow. Those are two mythic figures. The image that comes to my mind now is of Picasso's Minotaurology, an engraving that shows a great monster bull approaching. The philosopher is climbing up a ladder in terror to get away. The bull ring there is a horse which has been killed, and on the sacrificed horse lies a female matador who has also been killed. The only creature facing this terrific monster is a little girl with a flower. Those are the two figures you have just spoken of, the simple, innocent, childlike one, and the terrific threat. You see the problems of the modern day. The poet Yeats felt that we are living in the last of a great Christian cycle. His poem, The Second Coming, says, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. What do you see slouching towards Bethlehem to be born?" I don't know what's coming any more than Yeats know, but when you come to the end of one time and the beginning of a new one, it's a period of tremendous pain and turmoil. The threat we feel and everybody feels. Well, there's the notion of Armageddon coming, you know? "I have become death, destroyer of worlds," Oppenheimer said when he saw the first atomic bomb explode. But you don't think that will be our end, do you? It won't be the end. Maybe it will be the end of life on this planet, but that is not the end of the universe. It is just a bludgeoned explosion in terms of all the explosions that are going on in all the suns of the universe. The universe is a bunch of exploding atomic furnaces like our sun. So this is just a little imitation of the whole big job. Can you imagine that somewhere else other creatures can be sitting, investing their transient journey with the kind of significance that our myths and great stories do? No. When you realize that if the temperature goes up 50 degrees and stays there, life will not exist on this earth, and that if it drops, let's say another 100 degrees and stays there, life will not be on this earth. When you realize how very delicate this balance is, how the quantity of water is so important, well, when you think of all the accidents of the environment that have fostered life, how can you think that the way how can you think that the life we know would exist on any other particle of the universe, no matter how many of these satellites around stars there may be? This fragile life always exists in the crucible of terror and possible extinction, in the image of Cabbage Patch doll juxtaposed with the vicious rainbow is not at odds with what we know of life through mythology. No, it isn't. Do you see some new metaphors emerging in a modern medium for the old universal truths? I see the possibility of new metaphors, but I don't see that they have. That's not the end of the sentence, but I'm just ending it there because I'm going to be taking some annotations for my work, and you guys are going to hear me struggle through this. So I know I can do theme, main idea, supporting idea, key details, stuff like that. So I think that second to last sentence from Moyers, and then the one above that also has some stuff that goes, well, let's say another 100 degrees and stays there. Life will not be on this earth. When you realize how very delicate this balance is, how the quantity of water is so important, well, when you think of all the accidents of the environment that have fostered life, can you think that the life we know would exist on any other particle of the universe, no matter how many of these satellites around stars there may be? I know this is important, but I'm trying to figure out what it is. Is it a theme? No, it's an idea. It has to be an idea. Man, I was mindlessly reading there for a while, so it's two things on this page. Okay, I'll let you guys go and do your notes too now, since I've just been constantly reading. If anybody actually does watch this. Alright, we'll see you next time on Dragon Ball Super.